Well, good evening, and it's great to see everyone this evening. And I'm going to begin a Bible study series that's going to run now through September 2nd on images in the Bible of overcoming the barriers that are between us and within us. Reconciliation is such a great, beautiful, comprehensive subject of Scripture that there's so many things to look at. So these will be different from the sermons that I'm preaching on Sunday morning, but I think the Bible study, character studies will really be useful and helpful, and I hope they will for you too. So thank you for joining in. Let's think about where this series is going to go.
Just to give a quick overview of what is coming up in these sessions is sort of a companion piece to our Sunday morning sermons, which will be on different texts. But the ministry of reconciliation has in its background the entire struggle in the Bible of dealing with the other in ourselves, the other in terms of our estrangement from God, the other as other people and other cultures. And many years ago, back in the 90s, I wrote a chapter in a book that is now out of print for the New Hope Publishing Company on the subject of dealing with diversity. And it really helped me to go back and look at Scripture and to realize that they were struggling with all of these same human instincts to cut ourselves off from others and all that sort of thing. So, at any rate, I wrote that on several biblical stories that helped give us some insight about the other and how to deal with it and diversity in Scripture. And so, tonight I want to talk about the story of the woman at the well. And next week we're going to have a business meeting, and we're going to have a really delightful surprise presentation. I hope you will tune in because it'll be a really cool night. So please join us next week when you get some information about that. Then the following week I'll pick back up with the study again, and we'll look at the cosmic part of reconciliation in the story of Jonah, how Jonah illustrates the plan of God for all of creation, not just for one special people. And then August 26th, overcoming the barriers, the story of Peter and Cornelius in Acts 10, where Peter has to confront his own prejudice and unwillingness to cross the barriers to the Gentiles. And then finally, come back on September 2nd on the reconciliation ministry of the church that's been given to us as embodied in the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. It's an interesting story, so I hope you'll be here for that. The truth is, each one of us comes to the Bible with our own pictures in our brain of what it was like. Here is an artistic piece from the 6th century depicting Jesus at the well with the woman. And then I also found a piece of art on the Vanderbilt lectionary page of a Rembrandt drawing of the woman at the well, and she looks like a good Dutch woman who comes there that day. This is the Marfa series, which is for African people, and they depict Jesus and the woman. Each of us sort of imposes our own cultural standards and images and all of that, so we think it sort of reinforces us. But that's in fact what the Bible goes against. It wants to challenge that in all of these stories. So today I begin with a little bit of a history lesson, a geography lesson, and then looking at the story now with some new eyes. So just very briefly, let me do that and begin with the geography lesson. And that is, if we're going to go to Jerusalem from Galilee, it helps us to understand that basically there were three generally three sections of what was first century Palestine, where the Jews were in Jesus' day. Now, over across the Jordan was a different kind of place that had all kinds of folks. But if we just look at from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, Jerusalem being down closer to the southern part, which is the northern part was known as Galilee. The southern part known as Judah. The northern part, sort of the heirs of the 10 tribes, and the southern part, the other two. And so after the exile, this changed considerably. But I want you to just see that in the Bible story, geographically, Jesus says to his disciples, we need to go through Samaria. And so that's challenging, because in Jesus' day, good Jews probably would have gone out of their way to avoid Samaria. They would have gone like this. They would have gone around, crossed over, and gone down the eastern side of the valley, and then back over again to avoid these folks. And we'll do the history lesson to sort of understand that. With that geography in mind, let's talk a little bit about the history of these three sections and what happened.
Now for the history lesson. In this encounter of Jesus with the woman at the well, we really just have so much there that just goes right by us when we read the story. Jesus comes to the well, first of all, having said to his disciples, I need to go to Samaria. They don't understand it. As I said, they would have crossed over and gone somewhere else. So in chapter 4, verse 9 of John, the woman says, how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. That single statement contains centuries of bad history. This may be hard for us to see because we're often focused on the more personal parts of the story, that God's love has the power to cut through the contradictions of a woman who had 5 husbands and now was living with someone who was not her husband. And that passage has been meaningful for us to talk about evangelism and encouragement of people whose lives have fallen apart. But in fact, there's far more there that has to do with the simple fact of Jesus even talking to her at all, not only because she's a woman, but even more so because she is a Samaritan woman. And what is he doing there? And now I have to go back centuries to 539 BC, when the Jews from Judea, the southern part I showed you, came back from exile with the blessing of Cyrus the Persian king. They saw it as a great deliverance. And so they came back and they started to build their city back, and the walls and the temple. And an interesting thing happens during this time. The Samaritans, the people who come to be known as the Samaritans, were already there. After 722, the people in the northern kingdom were just scattered out and they intermingled with foreign settlers. And so they were sort of seen as people of mixed race. And there was a growing difference between the southern Jewish people and the people called the Samaritans. And so it was kind of, who are the true Israelites? So here come the people back. They start rebuilding their city. And we actually are told in the book of Ezra that at first they, that being the Samaritans who were already there, see they're trying to rebuild, and they come over and they offer to help. But the Judeans say, no, this was given to us, not to you. This is ours to do. So their hospitality is rebuffed. They get angry about it. There's a growing resentment. They begin to harass and cause problems. So there's already a tension that's developing between these people. And so they send back word to the king of Persia. But Zerubbabel said to them in Ezra 4, this is Ezra 4:3, You shall have no part with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus of Persia has commanded us. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah, made them afraid to build, and they bribed officials to frustrate their plan throughout the reign of King Cyrus. So, see, there's all this bad blood happening hundreds of years before Jesus and this woman meet. So, the separation, the rift has begun. And again, it's over the building of the temple, which comes into this conversation. So at first, the Samaritans went to Jerusalem to worship, but eventually they sought their own place of worship. And this explains having a common Torah, but different places of worship. And during the reign of Alexander the Great, the Samaritans received permission to build their own temple on uh, Mount Gerizim, which is near now the town of Nablus, I think. So this hatred only increased over time and went back and forth. And then in 128 BC, after the events that are portrayed in Daniel and which embody a temporary period of independence for the Jews, um, John Hyrcanus became the high priest, but he was also a political leader. He married church and state together, always a bad idea. And though it was John Hyrcanus then took an army and they went to Mount Gerizim and they destroyed the Samaritans' temple. They never rebuilt it, but they clung to that place and the ruins that were there. And still, even today, there is a Passover observed on Mount Gerizim by the descendants of Samaritans.
Here are a couple of modern views of Mount Gerizim.
For Jewish people, then, Samaritan became a sort of racist term of abuse. And we see in John 8:48, it is applied to Jesus. They said, you are a Samaritan. And that's like a terrible thing. That's like the S word, if we want to say it that way. So Jesus does two remarkable things in this story that really tell us a lot. First of all, he goes through that place, ignores all this history, and creates a relationship with this woman and these Samaritan people. And we miss the cross-cultural significance of his trip through there. He had to pass through Samaria. I love the King James, the way it says it. He said, I must needs go through Samaria. And some of his contemporaries might have said, well, listen, I'd travel out of my way not to go to that place. Um, I, I heard a train conductor in New York once when we were talking, and he said, you're from the South. Of course, they always say that when they hear you talk. I said, yes. He said, well, I was going to go down there one time, but I heard those people will cut your tires if they know you're from up north. I mean, it's just all this crazy stuff that people believe. Jesus is facing this barrier, this alienation that represents the alienation down inside us with God. So love can be quite intentional. This means we are not just sunk into ourselves. To be a Christian is to take up the cross and go to the trouble of ignoring those things that create all these rifts in the human family. So it's better to find something common and universal and non-threatening when you go there. So he doesn't start off with all these lofty discussions about what you did to us back there and who was right and who shot John and who stole what from whom. He says, give me a drink of water. Many years ago in Blakely, Georgia, I had a wonderful group of leaders, African American and Caucasian leaders in the community that were trying to make a better community. And we got together monthly and had lunch and we talked about things. It was a great experience, wonderful people. And I didn't start with what are we going to do to fix the divisions that we have in our community. My first time there, I remember saying, where were you living when you were 9 years old? And what was it like? Where did you go to school? And who was the disciplinarian in their family? And oh man, they just were laughing and talking. And one of the things that happened is they began to discover so many commonalities rather than differences. So Jesus starts with a drink of water, strikes up a conversation. I think we can always begin with the assumption that there are God-given and universal human similarities that become the basis for a foothold in our work of reconciliation in the world. There are things all people have to do. They have to live, they have to eat, they have to live somewhere, they have to have shelter, they worry about their children. Start there. But secondly, he probes the misunderstandings that are there once this relationship is sort of established. Um, as he usually does, he pushes it until the limitations are revealed. And he replaces it with the higher calling of kingdom categories. And so they start talking about, well, you Jews worship in Jerusalem, we worship Mount Gerizim. Where's the right place? That's the old argument. And it ultimately takes us back to, you people did this to us, and God gave us this, and blah, 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 blah. Jesus says, the hour is coming and now is when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for such the Father seeks to worship him. If you're right with God, these things will sort of fall into their right place. God is greater than all of our little tribal claims. So now we can begin to see the story of the Samaritan leper in Luke 17:11-19, who is commended when all the others were not. We see the story of the Good Samaritan feeling really different because Jesus now is plunging right into a centuries old resentment and politics and cultural division. Now we know that even the early Christian church had to struggle with this. In Acts chapter 8, we see that they had an experience of Samaritans becoming followers of Jesus, and they then have these profound experiences. So Jesus really was challenging 6 centuries of division, competition, resentment, and said none of that is more important than God. He destroyed all the rationales for why they lived separately from one another and declared there was a new possibility for fellowship. Now, here's where we come down to it. Uh, Obviously, you can make the leap and see that we too have old history with one another in the United States of America, long histories. Secret misconceptions. We rarely trust each other enough to lay it on the table and speak. But when we do go there, Christ can transform us and make us new. Um, you know, um, I see people everywhere, even in the over the mountain community where we live pretty well, but we're from different places, different cultures. We're transplanted with jobs. We sometimes are really further apart with each other, and it's only heightened during this time. And so there's this opportunity. There are people whose kids don't make 5.0 out of 4, who drop through the cracks. Where is the opportunity for reconciliation? There. Um, but we also see these deeper things in our entire society that keep manifesting themselves. It has only heightened in the last 20 years, I would say. This history of those who've made it and those who haven't, or the gulf between African American, Caucasian, uh, people who grew up here and people who didn't, Arab, Jew, Native Americans, and descendants of settlers. All of these things have behind them bad, long history. And here's the hard piece of it. Out of those centuries of pain and resentment and misunderstanding come all the things that are embodied in our bumper stickers and our slogans and our memes and all the distrust that we hurl at each other. Saw a great post this week. A man was responding, and I don't know, I've seen it on the left and the right, where someone calls somebody who is just going along with this or that, a sheep. And he said, calling someone you disagree with a sheep is a strange insult for Christians to use. And then he said, also, insults are strange things for Christians to use. Jesus was insulted, didn't return it. Angry diatribes, disgust, condescension, resentment, all these are things that are ways that we sort of become the mouthpiece of our history, of our fears and tribal things. Who has the courage to go past it? Who is able to say there is a better way for us to live? We don't have to be afraid of each other, that God can help us. Well, Jesus is the one who can go there. And whatever else you want to be, you can't accomplish his will unless you're willing to let the one thing that pierces all veneers and digs down into the real stuff, the deep stuff, divine love, into your life and heart. So we're able to be free to look and not react and keep looking. And that is a glorious thing. Um, and so when you read this story, uh, be aware that you have a template here to show you that we don't have to be afraid of a long, difficult history. Now, the sad footnote to the story is that um, even after Christians learned this lesson, that uh, there are reports that after the time of Jesus, once Christianity became an official political religion of Rome, that Christians, in fact, destroyed uh, a structure that the Samaritans had on Mount Gerizim, and it was back where it was. This is something we have to keep learning, is to live apart from fear and distrust. And that only comes by turning to Christ and following him above all other things. Well, that's where I'd like to stop tonight, and hope this has been something interesting for you to think about. Um, and as you think about this moment with all these things that may cause you to feel a bit frightened or uncertain, recognize that sometimes in the images flashing past you on the screen, or the commentary that's being offered from one person or another, from one side or another, are embedded centuries of things we have argued about and struggled with, and pain inflicted, and no lasting solution is going to be found in a bumper sticker, but only in the Christ who could go to the core of our distrust and make it new. See you Sunday.